Greetings everyone, Melderon here, and welcome to the TBC Classic Advanced Shaman Guide Part 2. This guide is a culmination of the hard work and dedication of members of the Classic Shaman Discord over the duration of the beta. I can't stress enough how amazing it is to see so many people with passion and dedication to get a guide like this out. When you're done with this guide, or if there's certain information you really thought was interesting, please go over to the Classic Shaman Discord and thank the individuals that are responsible. I'll be going over who those people are during and at the end of the presentation. As with all of my guides, there are timestamps in a pinned comment below, and I use YouTube annotations to break up the guide, so if there's certain parts of the guide you're interested in, just use the annotations or the pinned comment. Also, I'll be referencing a ton of work that have been done by many people. In the description of the video, I'll have links to every piece of reference that I talk about. It'll be a very large list, so make sure you look through there and you can find either the BIS lists or the calculators I'm referencing or whatever that may be. Without further ado, let's get started. Before we get into the guide itself, I have to plug the Shaman Discord. I'm a co-founder of the Discord along with Egregious. This guide wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the people in the Discord. We have over 27,000 members. We cover both vanilla and TBC Classic. We have experienced and professional moderators and shaman trainers that can help you with any questions you may have. We have extensive discussion on spec-specific strategy, Theorycraft, leveling, play improvements, simulations, any question you can think of, professions, something that you have a burning question of. If you're playing Shaman in either vanilla Classic or TBC Classic, doesn't matter what spec, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're not part of the Discord. There are very smart people in there that are willing to help with anything you may have. There's a link in the description. Once you click that link, you'll be navigated to a README channel. The first 3 reactions you'll see in the top posts in the channel will open up certain parts of the Discord for you. If you click on the Vanilla Classic reaction, you'll only see Vanilla Classic content. If you click on the TBC one, you'll only see TBC content. And yes, we are already preparing for Wrath of the Lich King Classic. If you click on more than one, it'll open up all of these sections of the Discord. So if you're only interested in one expansion or one part of the game, just click on the ones you're interested in, and the Discord will open up to you. That's how you gain access to the channels in the Discord. You've already probably noticed that this is called Advanced Shaman Guide Part 2 for TBC Classic. That's because there was a Part 1 that came out before the beta was released. And in that, I said that I'm using private server data. This may not be accurate, and when I get access to the beta and when the Discord gets access to the beta, we'll be doing a Part 2, and that's exactly what happened. And interestingly enough, there's a significant difference between private servers and TBC Classic. Not so much the math behind spells and abilities, but, bosses are much different than we thought. Difficulty is a little bit different than we thought. We thought it was going to be a pushover, and it really isn't. So it's interesting that we actually got access to the beta, and we had more eyes on it than we ever have before, and we found out some really interesting stuff, and we're going to be going over that in this guide. Part 1 is more basic. It goes over, basics for the class, spells, talents, abilities, why to use a certain ability. This one's going to be a little more high gear, and it's going to be much quicker than the last one. The last one was 3 hours long. This one will not be that long, because we're going to go over all the new Theorycraft that's available and just confirmations that we've made on the beta. Part 1 is not specifically required to enjoy or understand what we're going to be over in this video, but if you're lost, you might want to go back to Part 1, because we're going to go over more advanced topics this time, and we're going to be skipping the more simple stuff. So if you're interested in the more simple stuff, I try to do Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1 first, and then watch this video. And if you're even lost watching Part 1, I have a lot of videos that I've made before in Vanilla Classic that go over the basics of Shaman. So depending on where you are and how comfortable you feel with the class will dictate really which video you should be watching first. Alright, table of contents. The first section will be errors from Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1. Pretty short, but we're going to go over that. Part 2 is spell coefficients and downranking penalties. This section will basically go over all the spell coefficients that I tested and confirmations that I made on the beta. Part 3 will be general beta testing confirmations. This really isn't tied to any spec per se, it's just stuff we found out about the class. Part 4 will be Restoration, Theorycraft, and Professions. Part 5 will be updated Elemental, Theorycraft, and Professions, and Part 6 will be updated Enhancement, Theorycraft, and Professions. And then finally, we're going over additional resources, and we're giving the credits to the people who did the amazing work to make this guide. Okay, let's go over errors that I made during TBC Classic Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1. Most of these are errors I made in transcribing what I was saying or typos, so forgive me, but let's just go over those. The first thing is concerning haste. I said in the video, in the time it takes you to cast 100 spells, you can now cast 99 for each 1% of haste you get. What I should have said was, in the time it would normally take you to cast 99 spells, you can now cast 100. Haste also affects GCD, attack speed, but I was talking about spell casting. Concerning the elemental pet totems, Fire Elemental Totem and Earth Elemental Totem, I erroneously said that they have a shared 20-minute cooldown. What I meant to say is they have independent 20-minute cooldowns, but once one is used, the other is put on cooldown for 2 minutes, so you can't use both at the same time. During the Drain Eye slide, I said that their Shadow Resist ratio was Nature Resistance. That was a copy and paste error. Obviously, Shadow Resistance gives plus 10 Shadow Resistance. In the Elemental Theorycraft section concerning Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning cast times, I said that Blizzard increased the coefficients by 13% to make up for the cast time reduction. It's actually an 8% increase. I used the wrong calculation and said the wrong thing. So it's an 8% increase from what they should be if you take the cast time divided by 3.5. During the Troll race selection slide, the text says regeneration provides mana regen, which leads me to say mana when I say it. That's obviously wrong. It only affects health regen both inside and outside of combat, not mana. During the threat capping slide, in the enhancement section, I said that Shamanistic Rage will fall off if you aren't attacking the target. I meant to say Unleashed Rage. If you aren't aware of this, Shaman are notorious for having talents and abilities that sound exactly the same. Finally, there were a couple of mistakes I made with spell coefficients. I'll explain what those are in the next section. Okay, so about spell coefficients and downranking penalties. Again, I will not explain what these are. Part 1 explains what these are. Most of the spell coefficients I tested in TBC private server were correct and matched the values I received in the beta client, but we'll go over any inconsistencies and I'll point out the inconsistencies and things that I was surprised to see. The downranking penalty is applied to all Shaman spells except some totems, Flame Tongue Weapon, but not Frostbrand, and Lightning Shield. The correct formula to calculate the DRP depends on the spell actually. However, for the vast majority of spells, the formula is as follows. It's the level of the next rank that you're investigating, not the one you're investigating. So let's say you're looking at a spell and it was learned at level 20 and the next rank was learned at 28. You put 28 in this equation, not 20. It's the level of the next rank of spell minus 1 plus 5 divided by the character level that you currently are, and that gets the downranking coefficient, which you'll multiply to the actual spell coefficient. However, for spells that have more than 11 levels in between their spell ranks, which is Frost Shock and some Earth Shock ranks, the other formula from part 1 is actually more accurate. It's the spell level of the spell you care about plus 11 divided by your current character level, and that gives you the downranking coefficient. If the result of these equations is 1 or more than 1, there is no downranking coefficient. Just make sure you keep that in mind if you're doing these calculations yourself. Let's go over the Frost spells and imbues first. First spell will be Frost Shock. Now, what's really interesting about this is I've always thought that the coefficient for this spell was 40%. The reason why it's 40% is because instant casts are considered 1.5 second casts for spell coefficient calculations. 1.5 divided by 3.5 is about 42.8%. However, since Frost Shock has an additional effect, it slows the target, there's a 5% penalty to the spell coefficient, which is why I thought it was 40%. And that was what everyone thought forever, basically. But it's recently been found out that the penalty for additional effects is actually 10%, not 5%. A 10% reduction to an instant cast spell is actually 0.386 or 38.6%. So this is actually pretty interesting. It probably isn't interesting to you, but people who actually test spell coefficients a lot, we've all thought that it was a 5% penalty to additional effect. It's actually 10%, and I've corroborated that, and thank you, Huang, for finding this out for me and letting me know, because we were all in the assumption that it was still 5%. So anyway, long story short, all of the ranks work out. There is a downranking penalty for Frost Shock. There's no pre-20 penalty because it's learned at level 20. And with Concussion, which is a 5% increase to the coefficient in TBC, not just to the damage, we get up to 40.5%, and that's what I got. So Concussion does affect the spell coefficient for Frost Shock. Frostbrand Weapon Imbue. The first rank is learned at level 20, so there is no pre-20 penalty. However, there are downranking penalties for the first 4 ranks. It has a 10% spell coefficient, what we thought, and that checks out. And Elemental Weapons does increase by 5% each rank, for a total of 11.5% if you have Elemental Weapons. The initial damage portion of Flame Shock actually has a 21% spell coefficient. I made a mistake in TBC Part 1. I said it was higher than that. It's 21 for the initial. There is pre-20 for the lower than level 20 ranks. There's a downranking penalty, and everything checks out, 21% in the highest rank. And if you have Concussion, it's boosted by another 5% to 22%. So you do get a little bit of a boost with Concussion to Flame Shock's initial damage portion. Very similar story with the periodic portion of Flame Shock. Periodic has a 10% coefficient, there's a pre-20, there's a downranking, and with Concussion you get an extra 5%, so you get a 10.5% spell coefficient with Concussion, which of course is a nice boost to either Elemental or Enhancement Shaman if you have this talent. Searing Totem is one of the totems that does not have a downranking penalty. The math in here is what it would be if it did have a downranking penalty, but as you can see, all of the ranks, except for the first rank, which has a pre-20 penalty, which still affects this totem, has 16.7% of their spell power applied to it. Now, if you do have Call of Flame, that does increase the spell coefficient by 5% each rank, a total of 15% if you have all 3 ranks, to 19.2%. Magma Totem, very similar to Searing Totem, there is no downranking penalty. There's also no pre-20 because your first rank is under level 26. It has a 6.7% spell coefficient per tick of Magma Totem, and if you have Call of Flame, that moves up to 7.71% per tick. Next we have Fire Nova Totem, which for some reason has a downranking penalty. First rank also has a pre-20 penalty. This is interesting. I don't know why Searing and Magma don't have downranking penalties, but Fire Nova does. I can't think of a practical reason why. I've submitted all of this information to Blizzard via numerous bug reports. I don't think it's a bug. I think this is just how it was done. So just keep that in mind. Call of Flame does increase the spell coefficient by 15%, just as it did with the other two totems. It goes from 21.4% to 24.6%. The final fire spell or imbue is Flame Tongue. What's interesting is there is no downranking penalty for Flame Tongue weapon, but there is for Frostbrand. I don't know why. Again, this stumped me. I don't understand why one would have one and not the other. There is a pre-20 for the first two ranks though, and that does affect the spell coefficient. It's not hugely important. You would never downrank a weapon imbue, really. So, but just an interesting kind of artifact I found. Elemental weapons, just like Frostbrand, does increase the spell coefficient by 5% each rank for a boost from 10% to 11.5. Moving on to the nature spells. Lightning Bolt, the bread and butter of the Elemental Shaman. So Lightning Bolt is interesting, as we talked about in part 1. It went from a base 3-second cast to a base 2.5-second cast, and with that came a very small reduction in the spell coefficient. Lightning Overload does make up for that, but the spell coefficient for Lightning Bolt, at least the 2.5-second base ranks, is 0.795 or 79.5%. What's interesting is I have no idea what the spell coefficient is for rank 1 and rank 2 because it's not the cast time divided by 3.5. They did some kind of weird math with Lightning Bolt, so I'm not sure what those coefficients are supposed to be, but they test out to be, with the pre-20 penalty and the downranking penalty, to be about 2.3% for rank 1 and 9.5% for rank 2. Again, as you can see, there is a pre-20 and a downranking for Lightning Bolt. Rank 11 is the first non-penalized rank, and you can see there that it tests at 79.5%. Now, what's interesting is if you do have Storm Strike applied to the target, it does increase the spell coefficient of Lightning Bolt by 20%, boosting it up to 95.4%. If you have Concussion actually increases the spell coefficient of Lightning Bolt by 1% each rank, so it's 83.5% if you have 5 out of 5 in Concussion. And if you have Concussion and you're benefiting from the Storm Strike buff, your coefficient goes up to 100%. So very interesting, and there is synergy between Storm Strike and Concussion. So this is really good news for the Elemental Shamans out there. Not only do you get a boost from Lightning Overload to your effective spell coefficient, but you get a boost from Concussion, and you could potentially steal some extra spell power from your Enhancement Shaman brethren. Moving on to Chain Lightning, which is very similar to Lightning Bolt in that it had its cast time reduced from 2.5 to 2 in its base state. There is no pre-20 penalty for Chain Lightning, but there is a downranking penalty for the first 4 ranks. The adjusted coefficient after the cast time reduction is 64.1%. Of course, Chain Lightning can also hit more than one target. It hit up to 3 targets. So at each bounce of Chain Lightning, you see a reduction in the damage by 30%. Well, the spell coefficient also is reduced by 30% with each jump. If the first target receives 64.1% of your spell power, second target receives 44.9%, third target receives 31.4%, and that's unbuffed. I say unbuffed because Storm Strike can increase the spell coefficient just like Lightning Bolt by 20% to 76.9%. Concussion increases by 1% each rank for a total of 67.3%, and if you have both, you get up to 80.8%. Just like Lightning Bolt, the coefficient was reduced because of the cast time reduction, but you make up for it with Lightning Overload, and you make up for it with Concussion, and of course, potentially Storm Strike if you want to steal some spell power. Just remember, whatever the base coefficient is after any buffs you get, jumps always are 30% less than the jump before it, as far as damage is concerned and the spell coefficient. Moving on to Lightning Shield. Lightning Shield does not have a downranking penalty. Again, don't know why. It just doesn't. It has a pre-level 20 penalty for the first 2 ranks. The coefficient for Lightning Shield, it's one of those things that's been really kind of disputed in private servers. Everyone thought it was 33% per orb. It was less in Classic. It was like 27%. It seems to be about 28% in TBC Classic. It's somewhere between that 27-28% range. You do get up to 33% with things like Storm Strike or Improved Lightning Shield, so I'm wondering if people maybe somewhere thought they had Improved Lightning Shield, they saw it was 33%, and they recorded it as that. Just keep in mind that the base coefficient is approximately 20% per orb. With Storm Strike, again, that's a 20% buff. If you have Storm Strike applied to the target and they hit you and Lightning Shield procs, it receives 33.7% of your spell power. If you have Improved Lightning Shield, each rank of Improved Lightning Shield increases it by 5% for a total of 15%, and that brings the coefficient to 32.3%. And if both are applied, if you have Storm Strike affecting the spell coefficient and Improved Lightning Shield, it goes up to 38.8%. So there is synergy between Storm Strike and Improved Lightning Shield. But again, there is no downranking penalty. You can downrank it effectively if you'd like for some extra damage. Could be nice in PvP if you just don't need mana as an Enhancement Shaman or an Elemental Shaman to do some additional damage for less mana. Our last nature spell is Earth Shock. Earth Shock, just like Frost Shock, has a 10% reduction to the spell coefficient because of its additional effect. Earth Shock is an interrupt, and because it has that additional effect in addition to the damage, it receives a 10% reduction to the spell coefficient. So just like Frost Shock, I originally thought this was a 40% spell coefficient, but since it's a 10% reduction, it's 38.6%. Earth Shock has a pre-20 penalty for its lower ranks. It has a downranking penalty, and it is affected by both Storm Strike and Concussion, just like the other nature spells. So Storm Strike will increase by 20% to get up to 46.3%, and Concussion will increase it by 1% each rank to 40.5%, and if both are active or applied, you can get up to 48.6%. So it's nice that you can boost this damage of this shock. You're not going to be using it very much as elemental, but you will be using it in PvP, so that's nice. And enhancement, depending on your build, you may go with Concussion, and that will increase your DPS. Moving on to the healing spells. Healing Wave, which is the most basic healing spell. It's the long healing spell that shamans will use. Single target, mostly for tank healing. The coefficient is 85.7%, exactly what it was in Classic. There are pre-20 penalties for the first 4 ranks, and then downranking penalties for the first 10 ranks. Purification and Healing Wave both increase the spell coefficient of this heal. Purification increases it by 2% each rank for a total of 10%, moving the coefficient to 94.3%. If you have Healing Wave, each stack of Healing Wave you apply to the target you're healing will increase the spell coefficient by 6%. So with 3 stacks of Healing Wave, it'll increase it by 18%, moving it up to 101% spell coefficient. If you have Purification and Healing Wave applied to the target, you move up to 111% spell coefficient, so much higher than your actual spell power. Purification is much more powerful than it was in Classic, and because of this, so is Healing Wave. Definitely want these talents if you're healing in TBC Classic as a shaman. Now on to Lesser Healing Wave. Lesser Healing Wave has a 42.9% spell coefficient because of its short cast time. There is a downranking penalty for Lesser Healing Wave for the first 5 ranks. Purification increases the spell coefficient by 10% with 5 out of 5, and boosts the spell coefficient from 42.9% to 47.1%. Just keep in mind, guys, I keep saying that X has a downranking penalty for the first Y ranks. That's only if you're level 70. Remember, downranking penalty is dependent upon the level you are currently, right? So if you're level 60, the downranking penalty looks way different than it does at 70. So just know that the equation you're using, if you're lower level and you're using lower ranks of spells, those ranks may not receive a penalty because of the level you are. Everything I present here is assuming you're level 70. So if you're a lower level than that, you're going to have to recalculate all of these spell coefficients. Moving on to the most used heal for Shaman, Chain Heal. There really aren't any surprises here. Chain Heal receives a 50% reduction in its effect each jump. That also affects the coefficient. Just like Chain Lightning has a 30% reduction, and that affects the coefficient, Chain Heal operates the same way. The base coefficient for Chain Heal is 71.4%, same as it was in Classic. The second target is a 50% reduction, so it's 35.7%, and then the third target has a 50% reduction from that, 17.9%. Purification does increase the spell coefficient, just like it does with the other heals, by 2% each rank for a total of 10%. So with Purification, your main target will receive 70.5% of your spell power, second target 39.3%, third 19.6%. However, we also have a new talent in TBC Classic called Improved Chain Heal, which has 2 ranks and increases the effect and the spell coefficient of Chain Heal by 10% each rank for a total of 20%. So with Improved Chain Heal, it gets boosted to 85.7% of your primary target, 42.9% on your secondary target, and 21.4% on your tertiary target. If you have both, there is synergy, and your primary target will receive 94.2% of your spell power, your second target will receive 47.1%, and your third 23.6%. You definitely want these 2 talents if you're healing as a shaman for obvious reasons. Chain Heal is your most used spell, and this makes it much more powerful, so definitely use these talents. The next is Healing Stream Totem, which, like some of the other totems, does not have a downranking penalty. There is also no pre-20 penalty because the first rank is under level 20. Now, Healing Stream Totem receives 4.5% of your available healing power each tick. Now, what's interesting is that Restorative Totems, which did not affect the spell coefficient in Vanilla Classic, increases the spell coefficient of this totem by 5% each rank for a total of 25%, boosting it to 5.6% of your spell power each tick. Purification, just like all the other spells, increases by 2% each rank. If you have 5 out of 5, it'll boost to 4.95% of your spell power each tick, and if you have both, there is synergy, boosting to 6.19% of your spell power each tick of Healing Stream Totem. Moving on to the 41-point talent for TBC Classic for Resto Shaman, Earth Shield. There are 3 ranks of Earth Shield. There is a downranking penalty just for the first rank at level 70, penalty, while the other two ranks do not have a downranking penalty. The coefficient for Earth Shield is 28.6% for each charge. There are 6 charges, so 28.6% for each charge, which is 171.6% of your spell power for all 6. Earth Shield, however, is affected by Purification, which increases the spell coefficient by 2% each rank for a total of 10%, so at 5 out of 5, you'll get 31.5% of your spell power each charge, or a total of 188.8% of your spell power for all 6 charges. Purification, obviously, is a very, very beneficial talent in TBC Classic for Resto Shaman, because it affects all of your heals. Moving on to the final spell coefficient, we're going to be talking about Gift of the Naru, which is a heal, even though it's a racial, so I tested it as well. Gift of the Naru is a 15-second hot you can put on yourself or another ally. It heals 5 times in that 15 seconds, so it ticks every 3 seconds, and receives in total 100% of your spell power. So if you put it on a target, you'll receive 100% of your spell power over the duration of the spell. Just like most healing over times, like Renew and stuff like that, is very similar. Purification, however, does increase the spell coefficient of the spell by 10%, so you actually receive 110% of your spell power with 5 out of 5 for Gift of the Naru. Something to keep in mind. So it is not a waste to use. It can be interesting considering Shaman don't have a hot. As a Draenei Resto Shaman, you will have a hot every 3 minutes, which isn't great, but at least you'll have it. And it is good kick bait in PvP, as I said before, because it doesn't belong to a school. So if you cast it and you get kicked, it won't lock you out of your other heals. Moving on to the next section, which is general beta findings and confirmations. It's a random assortment of things we found out during the beta that we thought was important to put into the video. So I'll be going over all of them in a more of a rapid fire kind of sense. I'll do my absolute best to describe why it's important. And if you have any further questions on a specific finding, just go to the Shaman Discord, go to the channel that you think it should be talked about in, and just ask a question, and one of us will get back to you as soon as we can. All right, these are just the generic findings. I already talked about the downranking penalty, but the most accurate formula is the level of the next rank, not the rank you're interested in, the level of the next rank -1 + 5 divided by your current level. And as I said, there are some spells like Frost Shock and some of the Earth Shock ranks that are trained at higher intervals, like every 12 levels, and in that case, you'll use the spell level of the rank you're interested in plus 11 divided by your current level to get a more accurate description of the spell coefficient. Repeatable turn-in quests have been nerfed. The ZG coin and Biju turn-ins that everyone thought were going to provide a bunch of experience when you first get into TBC to boost you from level 60 to like 62 have been nerfed, so that isn't allowed. It's kind of against the development of a game to have people bypass the leveling process. You may disagree with me, but that's something that I feel really passionate about, so Blizzard has nerfed those. Totem stomp macros work in the game. These are used in PvP to kill Shaman totems, so be aware that if you're PvPing as a Shaman, skilled players will have macros that immediately target your totem and kill it. This can be beneficial in a way. Remember, Stoneclaw totem has a 50% chance to stun your target, so people who are really anal about killing your totems, you could bait them with that. Just something to keep in mind. But this is generally just something to keep in mind if you're PvPing, to know that people will be able to select your totems immediately and kill them if you put them down. So use your totems strategically. Potion cooldowns count down while logged off. This also happens in Classic. Say you pop the potion and it has a 2-minute cooldown, so you can pop another potion. If you log out, the potion CD will continue to count down while the effect of the potion will not. So you could potentially get in an extra resistance potion this way, or other types of things. Just something to keep in mind. Now, Bloodlust and Drums buffs are retained on group swapping. Now, this is very important. Let's say you are a warrior and you give your party Battle Shout, and then the raid leader moves you to a different party. You'll still have Battle Shout because you casted it, but those 4 people that you left in the other group will lose Battle Shout immediately. That is intended. That's the way it's supposed to work. Same thing happens with totem effects. So say you are a Shaman and you're Enhancement and you put down Grace of Air totem, and you're moved out of the group to Bloodlust, another group, which is associated with what we're talking about here. The individuals that you left no longer have your Grace of Air buff, and your new group does. That's how that's supposed to work. However, Bloodlust and Drums work differently. If you cast Bloodlust in a group and you leave that group, the previous group, the group you just left, still has Bloodlust, and they still are benefiting from it. Drums work the same way. If you cast Drums in a group and you guys are in a close enough range, you all get the Drums benefit, and then you can be moved out of that group and they'll retain the Drums benefit. So this is very important because one of the strategies around Bloodlust in TBC, and this is only exists in TBC, doesn't exist in Wrath because of things like Sated, you are able to strategize how you'll Bloodlust each encounter, and you'll be able to move Shaman around to kill a boss the most strategic way. Maybe the most strategic way is buffing all of your hunters. Maybe it's buffing your warlocks, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's buffing your melee. Maybe it's buffing the whole raid. You have the choice in TBC. And you could say, well, this could lead to some, bad metas and stuff like that. I don't think it's going to be as bad as people think because each boss is different. The strategies to kill each bosses will be different. And what I've seen so far in Karazhan and Gruul's and Mags mechanics is that you don't want to just stack Bloodlust on one party, because the damage outputs vary than what they did on private servers, and so do mechanics. Just keep in mind that you have this option as a raid leader, and tell your other shaman and your raid lead about this. This is very important. All right, let's go over the spell confirmations. Totem of Wrath crit and hit is currently stacking. Yes, if you have more than one elemental shaman in your group and you have the 41 point talent, you can stack the effects of Totem of Wrath. So let's say, you're a warlock and you have 4 elemental shaman with you, you can get an extra 12% crit and 12% hit. I don't know if this is a bug, I don't know if this is going to stay forever, but this is how it's working right now. Wind Fury Weapon has a 3-second ICD. We all knew that. Wind Fury Totem has no ICD. The Wind Fury Totem you're providing to your melee group as an Enhancement Shaman or whatever shaman you are in a 5-man, they don't have a 3-second ICD, but the Weapon Imbue does. And no, it doesn't mean using the totem is better for DPS. Remember, the totem only provides 1 extra attack for less bonus attack power, and it can only proc on your main hand. It's not worth it. Don't use it. Use Wind Fury Weapon on both your main hand and offhand if you're going to DPS as an Enhancement Shaman. Earth Shield snapshots. This is really cool. So does Divine Spirit on priests. But what this means is, let's say you have a on-use trinket that increases your spell power, but you don't want to use that trinket in combat for the boss encounter. You can pop the trinket, put Earth Shield on your tank, take off the trinket before you engage the boss to the trinket you do want to use, and that first Earth Shield, those 6 charges of Earth Shield that the tank has, will receive the extra spell power that you used when you cast it. This is really cool, and I think it's just an extra little flavorful thing that Resto Shamans can use in PvP and PvE to maybe enhance an Earth Shield. Stoneclaw Totem does not break stealth. It didn't in Classic, and it doesn't in TBC. So don't try to use it to break stealth. But it did on private servers, and that's why it's in here. Tremor Totem ticks on application, and then ticks every subsequent 3 seconds afterwards. Tremor Totem seemed to work a little bit better in private servers than it did in TBC Classic. We thought that was the correct way it was supposed to work. It works just as it did in Vanilla Classic, and therefore it's just as unreliable as it was in Vanilla Classic. It's not something you can rely on. Remember though, if you're not feared, and someone in your party is feared, if you drop it immediately, it will cleanse the fear. So make sure to use it that way if you can. Wind Fury Totem hits are white, Wind Fury Weapon hits are yellow. So what that means is, Wind Fury Totem, which is the benefit you're providing to other melee in your group, the extra attacks that it provides are white hits, which means they are on a 2-roll system. Wind Fury Weapon, the buff you put to yourself as the Enhancement Shaman, the extra attacks are yellow, and they're on a 1-roll system. They cannot glance if they're yellow, and they are subject to some other different mechanics too. If you don't understand what I'm talking about 1-roll versus 2-roll, I have a video that I did a while ago from Vanilla Classic called Melee Mechanics Guide, and it goes into kind of what I mean by 1-roll versus 2-roll. There's no more glancing reduction in TBC as there was in Vanilla, but still this is beneficial for us. Let's just make it clear that that's what it is as Shaman. Lightning Shield does not snapshot. I just explained you could snapshot with Earth Shield. You can't do that with Lightning Shield, so don't try. Wind Fury on main hand and offhand leads to a 36% chance to proc outside the 3-second ICD. I will explain what this means in depth in the enhancement section. Overall though, if you look at the entire encounter, the chance to proc Wind Fury is still 20%, and I'll explain why that is. Wind Fury hits function as additional hits and can proc on hit effects, but not on equip effects. So essentially, if your weapon has a on hit effect, Wind Fury additional attacks can proc those effects. And this is a lot of the work that Gideon AI has been doing, and I will be talking about his work and where you can find his Discord later on. Magma Totem and Fire Nova Totem are AoE capped. You probably heard in the news somewhere that there's an AoE cap that was introduced in TBC Classic, and then it's going to destroy mages, boosting people, and whatever. That doesn't really affect us, but what it does affect us is that in TBC, outside of a few spells like Flame Strike and Consecrate, spells that have an AoE are capped in the total amount of damage they can produce. If you're hitting more than 10 targets, the damage is capped to a total amount of damage so that each target after 10 targets receives less damage. So it doesn't really affect us very much in PvE. There's only a few instances where it does. So far in the beta, in the Botanica, at the end of the Botanica, there's like all those Threshers that come out. There's like 30 of them. And you'll notice that Magma will do a lot less damage on them because there's so many of them. Dark Runes cannot proc Water Shield. Dark Runes do damage to you as part of the effect to increase your mana. So you sacrifice health for mana. That hit that sacrifice of health does not give you mana back. So you cannot use Dark Runes in that way. They still will give you the mana that they're supposed to give you, but they won't give you any additional mana by proc Water Shield. Fire Elemental Totem attacks scale with spell power, but not attack power, and the coefficient seems to be about 50% per attack. Fire Elemental Totem does an attack that looks physical, but it's actually spell, just fire damage. That attack scales with spell power and has a spell coefficient attached to it. Each attack receives about 50% of your spell power, which is actually pretty good. But your attack power, any attack power gains you have won't increase that attack. But since Enhancement Shamans have mental quickness, you get bonus spell power from attack power. So increasing your attack power indirectly increases the damage of your Fire Elemental Totem via spell power. Lightning Shield, Water Shield, and Earth Shield are fully removed on a successful Purge or Dispel. The reason why this was tested was because at some point in TBC or on private servers, I'm not sure where, Earth Shield would be removed in like 2 charge increments on successful Purge or Dispel. I wanted to make sure this was the case. I used both rank 1 Purge and rank 2 Purge, and it fully removes the buff. However, if you have Healing Grace, which reduces the chance that you're successfully dispelled, and Healing Grace procs, or the effect occurs, Water Shield and Lightning Shield will actually use a charge on that dispel, and either provide mana or do damage respectively. So, say you have Water Shield up and you have 3 charges, someone tries to purge or dispel Water Shield off you, it's unsuccessful, Water Shield will actually use up a charge and give you mana back. Lightning Shield, if the same thing happens, will do damage to the person trying to dispel you. So it actually uses a charge. And this makes sense because in the tooltips it says that these effects will proc on hit, not on damage. Just using a spell on someone will proc these. Earth Shield, on the other hand, requires you to be damaged for it to proc. So if someone tries to dispel or remove Earth Shield and they're unsuccessful because of Healing Grace, you won't lose a charge of Earth Shield and you won't be healed. As in Classic WoW and Ghost Wolf form, you cannot proc weapon imbues like Wind Fury, Frostbrand, and Flame Tongue, but the Rockbiter DPS increase is still there and you will actually do extra damage in Ghost Wolf form if you have Rockbiter on your weapon or weapons. While in Ghost Wolf, casting any spell, totem, consumable, cancels the form immediately, which is actually super nice, so you don't have to sit there and cancel the form. You can just spam a button and it'll cancel. Casting Ghost Wolf removes Water Walking buff and resets the swing timer. Keep that in mind. You can't use Water Walking while in Ghost Wolf form. Some trinkets like Barrow's Peasant Collar and Skull of Impending Doom can be used in Ghost Wolf form and it doesn't break the effect. I don't know if that's true for every trinket, but at least those 2 trinkets you can use while in Ghost Wolf form, at least in the beta. Alright, let's go over some talent-specific confirmations we found in the beta. Lighting Overload procs on cast, not on hit. This is very similar to how clear casting works. In private servers, clear casting would only proc once the spell hit the target, not when the spell was cast. Lightning Overload, of course, is a 20% chance to cast a second free lightning bolt or chain lightning at half damage and no threat. You'll see the proc go off as soon as the cast happens, not when it hits. Spirit Weapons, which is the talent that reduces threat and allows you to parry for enhancement. In addition to reducing the threat of all auto attack, which is what the tooltip says, it also reduces the threat of Storm Strike and your Wind Fury procs. That's actually pretty big. Considering that enhancement is one of the most threat capped classes in TBC, any additional reduction in threat is very, very much welcome. Shamanistic Rage, mana returns. So when you click Shamanistic Rage, it says chance on hit to return some mana. The return procs occur on a PPM, and I've actually calculated what that is, and we'll go over that in the enhancement section. But what's really interesting is that it's not affected by the weapon imbue you use. So Wind Fury extra attacks do not give you more chances to proc Shamanistic Rage. However, using Storm Strike, which are 2 additional base attacks, significantly increases the procs per cooldown. So make sure you're using Storm Strike. I don't know why you wouldn't use Storm Strike when you're using Shamanistic Rage, but make sure that you are, and you'll get more mana returns back. Also, in addition to Wind Fury not affecting the rate of return, neither does weapon speed unless we're talking about a 2-hander versus 2 one-handers. Using 2 one-handed weapons, it doesn't matter what speed they are, you receive approximately the same amount of return per CD, but using a 2-hander is significantly lower. Another reason why 2-handers are really not great for DPS, unless you're in PvP situations and you're trying to one-shot somebody, but that's kind of niche. The biggest thing here is that Flurry has an internal cooldown of 0.5 seconds. What this means is, if 2 hits occur within 0.5 seconds of each other, only 1 Flurry charge is consumed, not 2. As a dual-wielding Enhancement Shaman, you want your weapons to hit as close to each other as possible so that you can benefit from this. And there's a whole section in the Enhancement Theorycraft portion of the guide that talks about this and something called Stagger and Sync, which we'll get into. Something that was not fleshed out in part 1 and is new and really, really exciting news. So we'll get into that. But basically, if you can get both your main hand and offhand to attack within 0.5 seconds of each other, you'll only consume 1 flurry charge instead of 2. Alright, going into some profession confirmations. This is going to be quick and dirty, basically. So Chaotic Skyfire Diamond is in the game at launch. launch. Engineering goggles are not in the game at launch. Primal nethers are buying on pickup on launch, so they can't be traded or sold. Mount skill is race agnostic, and what this means is in Classic Vanilla you had to have the riding skill of the city in order to ride their mounts. So you had to have wolf riding to ride wolves, etc. If you've gotten those PvP mounts in Classic, the first thing you'll notice is when TBC pre-patch or TBC launches, you'll be able to ride those mounts. Mount skill is race agnostic. Drums, you probably heard this already, but drums are split into normal and greater versions. Greater versions come out in the ZA patch. Also, Tinnitus has been added into the game. This is a Wrath of the Lich King debuff that was introduced so people couldn't use drums one after another. So drums can only be used every 2 minutes per group, and usually that'll mean you'll have one person doing the drums. You can always have backups, of course, but most likely won't need more than one person. The normal drums only have an 8-yard range, and they have a small 1.5 second or so cast time as well. So you have to make sure you're standing still to do it and casting it. Isn't really a big deal for melee, but it could be a big deal for casters. The greater drums, like I said, will come out in ZA patch, and they'll have a much larger range of 40 yards, so like a raid wide range. Let's go over some confirmations for internal cooldowns and procs. The totem cooldown is 1 second, which we thought it would be, and it is. Tier 2 3-piece has been nerfed to 5%, so this 3-piece bonus originally would increase the healing done to your secondary and tertiary chain heal targets by 30%. That's been nerfed to 5, making this set no longer BIS. Many one-handed weapons have been changed to main hand only. You've probably seen this already, but all the blacksmithing one-handers have been changed to main hand only. That significantly changed the BIS for Enhancement Shamans. We'll get into that in that section. The Ravager Axe is not AoE capped. The Ravager Axe, of course, is that axe in Classic you get in Scarlet Monastery from Herod that you do a spin, whirlwind or whatever, and you'd hit targets. That is not AoE capped. You can hit as many targets as you want with that. Scabbard of the Infinite Cycle, which is a healing trinket, has a 10% proc chance and a 45-second internal cooldown. Dragon Spine Trophy, the most coveted physical DPS trinket in the game, has a 20-second internal cooldown. The Lightning Capacitor, which is a very important trinket for Elemental Shaman, considering how much we cast and how fast we cast. The proc damage actually uses crit before our talents. So all of the talents, the Resto and Elemental talents that increase your crit chance, they don't affect Lightning Capacitor. It's unfortunate, but just the way it is. Crits from Lightning Overload, which are those free casts that come out 20% of the time if you're Elemental, those crits do proc and add to the Lightning Capacitor's charges, so that's very good news. Weapon Imbue spell crits also add to Lightning Capacitor and increase the charges, and that's Flame Tongue and Frostbite and Weapon. Fire Totem crits, however, do not, so there's a distinction there. The Lightning Capacitor crits do not proc clear casting. It's not your own spell, so therefore it does not proc Elemental Focus or clear casting. You cannot gain any stacks of Electrical Charge, that's the name of the buff or the charges that Lightning Capacitor builds, from spell crits for 2.5 seconds after gaining your third and final stack. So your third stack procs, Lightning Bolt comes out, there's a 2.5 second internal cooldown before you can gain another charge. The Elemental Mastery and the Chain Lightning combo, if you click Elemental Mastery and use Chain Lightning on 3 targets, you'll get 3 guaranteed crits if they all hit, and that instantly procs the trinket and leaves you with 0 charges regardless of how many charges you start with, and that's because of that 2.5 second internal cooldown. So just keep in mind, if you have 2 charges, you might want to try to fish for a third crit to get the Lightning Capacitor to do its damage, and then wait 2.5 seconds, then do your EM batch to make the most out of the trinket. Crit damage of the proc itself, it's unaffected by Elemental Fury. You don't get that double damage from your talent. It's only 150%, which is the normal spell crit bonus. And finally, the damage of the proc does not scale with spell power, so any spell power you have that will not affect the total damage of this trinket. Alright, ICDs and procs continued. The Eye of Gruul has no internal cooldown. Quagmiran's Eye has a 10% proc chance and a 45-second internal cooldown. The Spell Strike set bonus, which is a tail ring set, has a 5% proc chance and no internal cooldown. For these metagems, this is their proc and internal cooldown. Insightful Earthsiege Diamond has a 5% proc rate and a 15-second ICD. Mystical Starfire Diamond has a 15% proc chance and 35-second ICD. Bracing Earthstorm Diamond has a 1% proc chance, and unfortunately the ICD is not known. And Tenacious Earthstorm Diamond has an unknown proc chance, but it has no ICD. We can thank Gideon AI for testing all these things, and I will have a link to his Discord in the description. Romulo's Poison Vial has a 20-second internal cooldown. And finally, Spell Surge Enchant has a 15% proc chance and a 50-second internal cooldown. Okay, I'd like to talk about some outside research that's been done outside of Shaman that may affect Shaman, but just something you guys might want to check out if you're playing other classes. Again, I talked about Gideon AI. He's compiled a list of spell, attack power scaling, and internal cooldowns and proc chances. He does a great job of testing these things, and the link to his Discord and a link to some of the stuff he's been doing will be in the description of this video. An example of something that he figured out was that Skullflame Shield has 100% spell scaling, and that was something that people were talking about and ranting and raving about before TBC came out. No, it doesn't have 100% spell scaling. Yes, it does. And I remember reading his Reddit post, and he's like, guys, it has 100% spell scaling in retail, so it's going to have it in TBC. Of course, we went back and checked, and he was right. He knows what he's talking about. Again, links to his stuff will be in the description. And then finally, Meiji. If you guys don't know who he is, he's one of the foremost theory crafters for Warriors. He's part of the Fight Club Discord, and he's doing some Warrior testing for TBC as well. A link to his work will also be in the description of this video. Now it's time to go into each of the specs and talk about the most important Theorycraft that's came out, either from the beta or before the beta. Some specs are more represented than others. To be honest, Restoration has the least, because there wasn't much that changed between private servers and the beta. So that'll be a pretty quick section. Elemental may have a little bit more, but it'll be heavily based in the work that Egregious has already done, private servers, and has confirmed on the beta. And then finally Enhancement, which has the most. So we'll go through these different sections. If you want to skip to a certain section, use the timestamps in the pinned comment or use the annotations on the YouTube video itself. One thing that did change for every spec from private servers are professions, and that's because EPs have been Theorycraft a little bit more extensively and have changed. Also, big changes have happened to professions, like goggles not being available right away and the blacksmithing weapons. So make sure you visit at least the profession sections if you've already seen the Theorycraft that we've done on Restoration and Elemental. Let's start with Restoration. There are some excellent resources that exist already for Restoration. One of them being Egregious's calculator that he's written for Restoration Shaman, which will allow you to input all your stats and see what the best heals are for you to use in certain situations. We've already made a video guide about Restoration, which the Theorycraft portions of that are completely sound. The only things that are changing are the BIS options and the professions, which we're going to be going over in this guide, but everything else in that guide is still completely sound, and I would definitely watch that if you're going to be healing as a shaman in TBC Classic. And the third, which we'll talk about later, is Eek's progressive best in slot list for Restoration. The link to that will be in the description. The link to the video will be in the description, and so will the calculator. So make sure you go down to the description and look at the Restoration section of the description that I'll have down there. That will have the Restoration links that you should check out. The most important thing to think about is effectively using the right spell for the right situation. Now, downranking, of course, did receive a nerf in TBC Classic via the downranking penalty. That does not mean you won't be downranking as a Restoration Shaman in TBC Classic. Using the right heal in the right situation and being efficient about your mana is key to being a good healer. Because of that, we're able to suggest the best ranks of heals to have hotkeyed. For chain heal, you're going to have rank 1 as your low output trickle heal, rank 3 or 4 depending on your available spell power as your medium heal, and rank 5 as your high damage heal. Of course, as you progress through raid tiers and gain confidence in your mana consumption, you can up rank. That's why you have asterisks there for chain heal and healing wave. Talking about healing wave, rank 1 is very important to have on your bars so you can quickly apply healing wave stacks and potentially proc Ancestral Fortitude on a target. Very, very good to have that. Rank 7 or 8, depending on your mana efficiency and spell power, will be your low heal. Rank 10 will be your mid heal, and rank 12 will be your top heal, which you will pair with Nature's Swiftness in an emergency situation. We won't be using that often. Just make sure you don't go below rank 5 because the downranking penalty is so significant below that rank. And for lesser healing wave, you're going to have a rank 5 to heal lower HP targets like casters or people that are not in danger of being hit again, and then rank 7 is your quick emergency heal to use in emergency situations. If you're more interested in how downranking works in TBC, a friend of mine, Osgar, has created a downranking guide and tool that's interactive. You'll be able to input your spell power, compare spells, see how much mana efficiency is shifted and altered when downranking is put into effect, and even compare across classes or within your own class. A link to that will be in the Restoration section of the description of this video. Quickly going to go over EPs for Restoration. They are shifted a little bit from what Eeg originally presented in the video. So these are the EPs that are updated for TBC Classic. These are also on the calculator that I was talking about. So if you want to see these live on the calculator, you can do that. Also, EPs will be calculated for your current stats on that calculator. So very, very important to know. Just keep in mind that haste is very, very important for Resto Shaman and becomes the most powerful stat when it comes out in tier 6. And then MP5 gets less beneficial as the game goes on because you have more spell power and therefore you can downrank more often. So just keep these EPs in mind when gearing, but there is a progressive BIS list, which we'll talk about next. I have to say, Egregious makes it pretty easy to be a Resto Shaman. Not only does he have a calculator that tells you the EPs, but he also tells you what gear you're going to use anyway. So sometimes maybe the EPs aren't even worth knowing, but for big brains out there, you should check out both the calculator and this BIS list. This BIS list is created already for TBC Classic with the BIS pieces going all the way up to Sunwell. This is on ClassicWoW.live. The link will be in the description below, and he goes over every piece of gear and even optional pieces that you may want to get. And also on ClassicWoW.live is the written version of the video guide, which he keeps updating. So there will be many egregious links in the description. If you want to know more about Restoration, please go there and check that out. Before we get to the professions, let's talk about Aldor or Scryer. The enchants are extremely similar, to be honest, but Aldor is better throughout the entire expansion. The Saffron enchant is actually comparable to the Aldor enchant. It's pretty much the same, so you're actually one of the few specs that don't really have to go back in the Nax if you don't want to, if you are Aldor. At the end of the day though, if the profession items or early gear access is more important to you, go with the faction that facilitates those choices. Alright, let's go over Restoration professions. In phases 1 through 4, leatherworking and enchanting are the best options. In phase 5 or Sunwell, you can keep leatherworking or enchanting, or drop enchanting for alchemy for the trinket. Your call, see how the game feels by then, honestly. Leatherworking will end up being too strong for all of TBC, even with Tinnitus. Resto Shaman are basically ideal for drumming, since you will need at least one drummer per group anyway. Plus, the Windhawk set is solid for phase 1, and our BIS endgame chest is a leatherworking BOP as well. Enchanting will give you 20 healing spell power on each ring. You can no longer benefit from these enchants if you drop enchanting, so don't drop it. And because of that, any profession combo without enchanting gets you 40 less healing spell power. Alchemy doesn't offer much other than convenience in terms of consumes until phase 5 when it gives the BIS trinket, so that's why alchemy is BIS in phase 5 if you no longer need leatherworking. Jewel crafting has unique equipped gems, which are solid, and in phase 5 is a good necklace, but that's about it. You really can't benefit from the unique equipped gems anymore if you drop jewel crafting. There's no more profession swapping, as we thought there would be in TBC Classic. Tailoring offers Primal Mooncloth and White Men set in phase 1, and that's really about it. White Men set generally will get replaced in tier 4 content right away though. In Primal Mooncloth, you'll probably break the set for tier 4 shoulders. This is why tailoring is no longer considered BIS. The pieces have nice healing spell power and regen, but have basically no stamina, and I'm telling you, things hit much harder than we thought, and you might want some stamina for survivability. TLDR, leatherworking enchanting is a great choice for the whole game, and if you want to get a little more sweaty, you can drop leatherworking for alchemy if you want the BIS trinket. And thank you, Hatali, for writing this up. This is a really good summary, and some of the biggest questions we get every day in the Shaman Discord are, what professions do I have to get? So this is a very good breakdown of that. Now moving on to the elemental section. As with Restoration, not much has changed since the video Eeg and I did about a month or so back. The only things that really did change are profession choices, slight changes to EPs, and some gearing options. So we'll be going over all those things in the next section. As I've alluded to, there's some really good Elemental Shaman content already out there. As with Restoration, Eeg has also made an amazing calculator for Elemental Shaman. That goes over which rotation you should use with the current stats you're wearing. I would highly recommend using it, and we'll go over more about rotations and stuff like that in a few slides, but it's very important to use. Also, there's a sim that's been created by Logarithm, I hope I said that right, with the graphical user interface. The link for that will be in the description as well. It tells you how much damage you're going to do with the current gear set you have. Very cool that we have a sim for Elemental, because most sims are built for melee classes, so it's very nice. And as I said before, Eeg and I produced an Elemental PvE video about a month or so ago. In that video, it goes over all of the Theorycraft as to why you're using certain spells in certain situations and certain rotations. I'll go over that briefly in this guide again if you haven't seen that video, but I highly recommend to watch that video if you're going to play Elemental in TBC Classic. Just ignore anything when it comes to gearing or professions, because those have been updated, and we're going to talk about that at the end of this section. As with Restoration, Eeg has updated the EPs for Elemental, and these are EPs of certain spell power and crit benchmarks as you go through each tier in TBC Classic. Again, we provide you a progressive gear list going from tier 4 all the way up to Sunwell, but if you want to know the EPs, here they are here, and they're also alive on the Elemental Shaman TBC calculator. The meat of this section will be talking about rotation. It's the most important thing to know as an Elemental Shaman. And we have one of the least difficult rotations in TBC, to be perfectly honest. And while that's true, there's still a broad ability gap among Shaman players and nuance regarding what rotation and abilities to utilize in each encounter. The three most important things to think about are spell power, haste, and encounter duration when deciding which rotation to use as an Elemental Shaman in raids. The first rotation you'll come across and the most damaging until we start building a haste pool is the 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning rotation. It's a very simple rotation that revolves around fitting 3 Lightning Bolts into the 6-second Chain Lightning CD window. Talented Lightning Bolts 2 seconds, 3 2-second casts is 6 seconds, so you'll be able to fit 3 Lightning Bolts between every Chain Lightning. And the 3 Lightning Bolt Chain Lightning rotation is anywhere between 6 to 9% better than just casting an unhasted Lightning Bolt. Now that gap does get smaller smaller when you get 4 pieces of tier 6, which increases lightning bolt damage, and eventually lightning bolt spam eclipses the DPS of this rotation when you have enough haste. With this rotation, you'll use Elemental Mastery on cooldown for a free chain lightning to reduce the mana cost and have a guaranteed crit. But again, this is your tried and true highest DPS rotation until you start building enough haste. But remember, if you can't afford this rotation because the encounter is too long, you can add more lightning bolts in to offset the cost of chain lightning, or just do a lightning bolt spam if you really can't afford anything else. The big take-home message here with rotations in Elemental Shaman is that you can dictate how much mana you spend. If you want to spend the most amount of mana before haste, you do 3 lightning bolts, 1 chain lightning. If you want to increase your mana pool, throw in more lightning bolts compared to chain lightning. And if you want to save as much mana as possible because the confrontation is very long, just use lightning bolt. That brings us to the second rotation, the 4 lightning bolt chain lightning. This is the highest DPS rotation you can achieve in TBC Classic. Once you get enough haste, which is only about 1.5%, which is about 20 to 25 haste rating, you can unlock this as the highest DPS rotation, and it is more mana efficient than 3 lightning bolt chain lightning. It doesn't eclipse the DPS until that amount of haste, but it's always going to be cheaper than 3 lightning bolt chain lightning. And it is also better than a simple lightning bolt spam as well, regardless of any haste that you may have. But the lightning bolt spam, of course, is always the cheapest rotation. As with the 3 lightning bolt chain lightning rotation, it's ideal to use Elemental Mastery in this rotation on a chain lightning cast when you do not have Elemental Focus active. Also, with this rotation, even though you won't get enough haste usually unlocked until later in the game to make this the highest DPS rotation, every time you use Bloodlust, you should be using this rotation because Bloodlust easily puts you over that haste cap, that 1.27 to 1.59% haste. So whenever you Bloodlust, move into this rotation and you'll perform the highest DPS possible at that level. But until then, use 3 lightning bolt, 1 chain lightning. But once you get enough haste, this will be your highest DPS rotation for the rest of the game and is also more mana efficient than 3 lightning bolt, 1 chain lightning. Next is the 4+ lightning bolt chain lightning, and this isn't an actual rotation per se, it's the continuum of rotations that exist between 4 lightning bolt, 1 chain lightning, and a lightning bolt spam. Essentially, you can do any rotation that has some amount of lightning bolt compared to 1 chain lightning. The more lightning bolts you cast compared to chain lightning will be more mana efficient, but will also drop off in DPS. The 4 lightning bolt, 1 chain lightning is the highest DPS rotation once you reach a certain haste breakpoint, which is about 1.5%. Before that, 3 lightning bolt, 1 chain lightning is the highest DPS rotation. But as we've said, encounters can be much longer than a optimal DPS rotation can facilitate. In those situations, you add more lightning bolts in comparison to chain lightning, and this can be fluid. You can do 4 to 1, and then switch to 5 to 1, and then to 6 to 1, and then back to 4 to 1. It all depends on how much mana you have, and the more practice you have doing each boss fight, you'll know exactly how many lightning bolts you'll need to cast to get to the end of the fight without going That's the most important thing, is to do as much damage as possible, but not have any leftover mana at the end of the fight, right? That's the key, that's the goal. You use the calculator that E built to kind of determine what the best rotation is for you, and use fight length and think about that, and think about how you're going to attack each boss and which rotation you're going to use. Again, Elemental Shaman on the surface seem very simplistic. This is where the complexity comes, knowing which rotation to use to maximize your DPS. Finally, we have the Lightning Bolt Spam. This is the simplest rotation an Elemental Shaman has access to, and it's also the most mana efficient. It's literally just hitting Lightning Bolt over and over and over again. And it sounds like, why would I ever use this? But there are situations where you have no idea how long a boss fight's going to be, or it's becoming much longer than you thought, and you're going to have to resort to this rotation. An unhasted version of this rotation without any haste is anywhere between 5 to 9% less DPS than the 3 Lightning Bolt Chain Lightning, with the benefit of being extremely straightforward, however. At 7 to 8% haste, which is achievable pretty early on in tier 6, this will actually surpass 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning in DPS, and will be the most mana efficient. So the more haste you have, the more DPS this, of course, rotation will do, and that seems pretty simplistic, but it's not as bad to use this rotation if you have to. Again, you don't have to use just the infinite spam of Lightning Bolt. You can throw in a Chain Lightning every once in a while if you feel comfortable enough, but I can't stress this enough. The rotations for Elemental Shaman exist on a continuum. There's no set rotation. It's all about how many Lightning Bolts you cast in reference to Chain Light. The next 4 slides are visual representations of each of the rotations and how much damage they do at certain spell power benchmarks. So at 0 spell power, on the x-axis is haste going from 0 to 15%, and on the y-axis is DPS of each rotation. Pink is the standard Lightning Bolt spam, just Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Bolt. The green line is 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning. The orange line is 4 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning, and the blue is 5 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning. As you can see, as haste is increased, all of the rotations scale in DPS except for 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning. That's because 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning is inherently unscalable with haste, because you're casting 3 Lightning Bolts and then waiting for the Chain Lightning to come off cooldown. Obviously, that's not optimal if you have haste, because the GCD and cast time will be reduced. But as you can see, about 15% haste, even with 0 spell power, Lightning Bolt spam surpasses 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning. At about 3% haste, 4 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning surpasses 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning at 0 spell power. But as you add spell power, these haste breakpoints shift to the left. At 750 spell power is what you'll have pretty much in early endgame in tier 4. 4 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning surpasses 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning at only 1.5% haste. And Lightning Bolt spam surpasses around 8 or 9% haste. So again, you need very little haste as spell power increases to surpass 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning. At 1000 spell power, as you can see, it shifts to the left even more. And finally, at 1250 spell power, which is the spell power you'll achieve late game, you only need a little over 1% haste to surpass 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning. And these breakpoints are very easy to get to in tier 6. You'll get that haste very quickly, and of course, whenever you're bloodlusting or berserking, if you're a troll, you'll be able to unlock the 4 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning rotation. So how much haste is required for 4 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning to be superior to 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning? As I said again, it really depends on spell power and crit, and we have some benchmarks here. So 750 to 824 spell power and 25 to 27-ish spell crit, which is pretty much what you'll have early on. You only need about 1.6% haste. As spell power increases, you'll see the amount of haste you'll need drops. It's a non-linear drop-off, but once you get that 750 mark is pretty much very easy to get to. You'll have that very early tier 4, so once you achieve that much spell power, you only need about 1.5% haste to eclipse 3 Lightning Bolt 1 Chain Lightning. And once haste comes out more readily in tier 6, you'll get that very, very quickly, which means you'll be able to switch to that rotation very soon. And again, before that point, during Bloodlust or Berserking, you should be switching that rotation anyway. We're going to briefly go over Elemental BIS. Egregious has a progressive BIS list for Elemental Shaman in the works as a static link. However, that's still being uploaded to the website and being more polished. So in the meantime, he's provided me 70 upgrades links, which will be in the description for each tier of content. Now, a couple notes to make sure is this is assuming Chaotic Skyfire Diamond will not be in at launch, but it should be. So just don't take the gems too seriously here. Make sure you are using Chaotic Skyfire Diamond if it's in the game at launch. Another note is to get your hands on Hex Shrunken Head and Skull of Gul'dan whenever you can. Hex is a prio, but Skull is whenever, because the locks and other players usually take it first. And another note is because of the Draenei Racial, you may want to socket more plus hit if you are a Horde to get to cap, because we don't need much to get the cap, but you should get the cap, which is 16%, and you may need a little bit more hit from gems than a Draenei Shaman would, of course, because of their racial. I'm just going to leave each of these screens up so you can see what I'm talking about here. For the pre-raid BIS, the Incanter's Cowl is a good option if you can't get Hood of the Oblivion, and then I put some ring options to the right, and Khadgar's Knapsack, which is not a bad offhand, is as comparable to Mesthoril Honor Shield. So these are just maybe some alternatives you can get. Moving on to tier 4, I'll leave this up for a few seconds so you can pause the video if you want to see these pieces of gear. Tier 5, tier 6, and finally Sunwell. Once Egregious is finished uploading and polishing the progressive BIS list for Elemental Shaman, I will be putting a link in this video description. Just check back later and it should be there within a week or so. Moving on to Aldor or Scryer. Just like Restoration, the enchants are extremely similar, but Aldor is better throughout than Scryer, and Scryer is worse by about 3 EP worth of spell power, but gives some other items that you might want profession-wise or early endgame. The Saffron enchant is comparable to Aldor and better than Scryer in every phase, so if you can get your hand on the Saffron, it's pretty much comparable to the Aldor one. Like I said before, Scryer offers the Scryer's Blood Gem and the Seer's Signet, which are pretty good early game. The Blood Gem's not very useful for Ellie since we are naturally near hit cap. The Seer's Signet is replaced in Karazhan, so not really big reasons to go Scryer, to be honest. Draenei are heavily incentivized to go Aldor because they start with friendly, and they start unfriendly with the Scryers, so something to keep in mind if you want to play Alliance. And like I said about Restoration, if profession items or early gear access is really important to you, go with Scryers or whatever faction facilitates that. But if you're going to be BIS or min-max, Aldor is the way to go. Alright, let's go over the elemental professions. As of now, with greater jumps of battle and no engineering goggles or profession swapping, the best in slot professions for elemental shamans, personal DPS is leatherworking for drums and the crafted gear, and enchanting for the ring enchants, so very similar to Restoration. Engineering is good for explosive, may be used in addition to or instead of leatherworking after phase 2 depending on your raid composition and strategy, especially if you're speedrunning. As of April 29th, Blizzard has implemented Tinnitus for all drums, which makes makes them unchainable. This significantly lowers the utility of stacking leatherworking, but leatherworking retains its value for the single drummer in any group. This is also true if your group is spread and thus not benefiting from drums or suffering from tinnitus. Enchanting is better than jewel crafting by about 20 spell power until Sunwell, at which point it's only about 1 spell power. This is not considered buff necks like Chain of Twilight Owl, which increase the delta between enchanting and jewel crafting if your guild requires you to use them. However, these are bind on equip. You don't need to be jewel crafting to wear these. So if your guild is requiring you to wear these buff necks, which we cover in the elemental guide, I won't cover them here, it may be more cost benefit for you to go jewel crafting so you can make your own, but again, you don't have to be jewel crafting to wear these. You just have to be jewel crafting to make them, and if you can make your own, that might save you some coin. Tailoring for the Spellstrike or Sunfire Robe is never BIS. That's something that's changed between this guide and that guide, so if you were going to go tailoring for elemental, just don't. The set bonus is only worth about 20 spell power, while enchanting is worth 24 spell power. And Sunfire Robe is worth only about 10 spell power, while enchanting is worth 24 and jewel crafting is worth 23. So if you don't want to change professions, leatherworking and enchanting is the way to go. If you don't want to change professions and you want to save some coin with the buff necks if you have to wear them, leatherworking and jewel crafting is the way to go. And if you are perhaps doing speed runs, maybe engineering and either jewel crafting and enchanting is the way to go. Moving on to the most extensive and interesting, in my opinion, section of the Theorycraft is the enhancement section, or what I call the black box. There's a lot of moving parts in that black box to make enhancement work, to make it more optimal, to make it more efficient, and I find it to be extremely interesting. It's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of things you can do to improve your DPS or your buffs that you give to other people, and being the best enhancement shaman just requires more dedication, in my opinion, but doesn't mean you should be scared out of it. There's a lot to learn, and if you enjoy problem solving and you enjoy going the extra step to do some more damage or to squeeze out and eke out maybe more buffs for your party, enhancement's definitely the spec for you. And that's why I have officially decided to roll enhancement in TBC Classic. So it's the first time I've actually said this. I will be switching from, I knew I was switching from Resto. I originally thought it was going to be Elemental, but I kind of fell in love with enhancement on the beta and while doing testing for the last Advanced Shaman guide. So it's a lot of fun. Let's get started. As with all the other specs, let's go over some enhancement resources that are available to you that I'll be highlighting in this portion of the guide. Nijanen and Beagle have created a spreadsheet and sim for enhancement. Link will be in the description below. This lets you put in gear, talents, everything, and then sims the DPS for you. They are working on creating a website for this to be hosted on, but it works fine in the spreadsheet. Just make sure you make your own copy and play around with it. It's very, very good. This is how a lot of the DPS metrics have been pulled and extrapolated from for this guide. There's also a BIS list by Garkor and Gitch, who are continuing to work on and using the simulator to create the BIS list for each tier. And then Eben and I have produced an enhancement PvE video about a month or two ago, and that's very sound for understanding the ins and outs, abilities to use, what talents to use, and understanding what weapon imbues to use in your basic rotation. This guide will go over some new things we've learned about enhanced while that video was made, and some additions to BIS and professions. Okay, let's talk about the 36% Wind Fury proc feature. I alluded to this in the beginning parts of the guide, and this is a very interesting aspect of enhancement DPS. Now, this was figured out in original TBC by Elitist Jerks, and private servers did code, as far as we know, this feature in them as well. And we did 2 independent tests to see if this was actually a thing in the TBC beta, and we've corroborated that it does exist. So what this means is that each of your weapons, when you're dual wielding, and you have to have both of them imbued with Wind Fury in order for this to be a thing, each of your weapons has an independent proc chance of 36% to proc Wind Fury weapon. Now remember, there is a 3-second ICD for Wind Fury, so this 36% chance only occurs if you're outside of the ICD. The first way we approached this was work that was done by Dragonhoof, the Bloodborne, and T-Bone, and if I'm missing anyone, I apologize. I know there's probably more people involved in this. They worked with logs they had of 3,145 melee hits with Wind Fury, Imbue, and they showed a 36% proc chance. Out of those 3,145, 1,825 were outside the ICD, and that consisted of 897 main hand hits and 924 offhand hits. For those hits, there were a total of 646 Wind Fury procs, 342 main hand and 304 offhand. Therefore, the proc chance of Wind Fury is approximately 35.4% if you take 646 procs divided by total amount of attacks outside the ICD, which is 1,825. However, if you look at the total average damage, so 646 Wind Furies out of those 3,145, the chance to proc Wind Fury total is 20%. Now you're saying to yourself, well, Melderon, that's 20%, it's not 36%. However, if the Wind Fury proc chance independently was actually 20%, then there will be only 365 Wind Fury procs outside the ICD for an overall Wind Fury proc chance of only 11.6%. So this was a way for Blizzard to kind of control for the ICD. By making the independent Wind Fury chance 36% when dual wielding and dual imbuing Wind Fury, you get to a grand total of 20% by increasing the proc chance. This is actually really important, and if you only use one Wind Fury imbue when dual wielding or using a two-hander, then the Wind Fury proc chance even outside the ICD is only 20%. This is big, and this is one of the reasons why Wind Fury is one of the top imbues for DPS. It wouldn't be if it was only 20%, and why it's also more consistent than it was in Vanilla Classic. But I did a second test myself to just kind of corroborate this. So this all started when AL was talking, we were talking about Enhancement Shamans in PvP. The topic of conversation was about Wind Fury in an opener. Say you're running up to an enemy, and you click the attack button, and you click Storm Strike at the same time. Well, in those situations, you're actually attacking 4 times in a very short window. Your main hand and offhand attack, Storm Strike also attacks. That's 4 total potential attacks that can land. Of course, they could be missed, dodged, parried, blocked, whatever, depending on who you're fighting. But if all 4 of those land, the question Ale proposes is like, well, how often would Wind Fury proc in those openers? And indirectly, this is a way to also test the 36% proc feature. Since all of those attacks are happening all at once, only one of them can proc Wind Fury. If there wasn't an ICD, all 4 could potentially proc Wind Fury, and that would be pretty amazing and pretty overpowered, and Enhancement Shaman could potentially one-shot any class in PvP because of that. So I did some basic math, and if the Wind Fury proc chance is actually 20% when dual wielding and dual imbuing Wind Fury, then we only expect to see Wind Fury proc at only 59% of those openers, and the math of the probability to calculate that is 1 minus the chance of not proccing Wind Fury, which would be 80% if it was a 20% chance, raised to the amount of hits there are, so 4. So 1 minus 0.8 raised to the 4th power is 59, or 0.59. However, if the Wind Fury proc chance is actually 36%, then we expect to see a Wind Fury proc in 83.2% of openers. So it's 1 minus the chance of not proccing Wind Fury, which is 64%, raised to the amount of hits, or 4. And I did a bunch of openers and tested this, and I only used openers where all 4 hits actually hit the target, and lo and behold, I observed Wind Fury procs in 83% of the openers. So this is another piece of evidence to show that there is a proc feature, 36% proc feature when dual imbuing Wind Fury and Wind Fury. So just take this in mind, keep it in mind, and understand that this is part of TBC, and it always was a part of TBC, even in original, and it's a way to normalize the Wind Fury chance to proc with a 3-second ICD limitation. And this second test is exactly why Blizzard did an ICD. So let's think about this quickly for a second. All Blizzard needed to do was give Wind Fury a 20% proc chance and not have an ICD, and you would get the same result. You would get, on average, over the course of combat, 20% of your attacks proccing Wind Fury. So then why would you impose an ICD? It's actually very simple, and it's because of the PvP aspect. Imagine if there was no ICD, and all 4 of those attacks on the opener could proc Wind Fury. Or imagine even further that all of your attacks could proc Wind Fury at a 20% rate. Enhancement Shaman attack very frequently because of Flurry, because of Storm Strike, only being a 10-second cooldown. I think Blizzard was afraid that Enhancement Shaman would be too overpowered in PvP. So they imposed a 3-second ICD limitation, and then thought to themselves, wow, we just really significantly nerfed DPS though. How can we rectify that? The way you rectify that is you increase the proc chance to 36% outside of the ICD. You still get your 20% overall chance to proc, but you nerf the randomness of multiple Wind Fury procs in PvP. This has never been officially announced as to why there was an ICD, but this is the reason I'm going with, and it makes the most sense to me. So TLDR, this feature is in TBC. It's to normalize DPS around an ICD imposed because of PvP. That's my stance on it. If you have any more thoughts on it, let me know. But that's why I think they imposed it. Okay, now moving on to Shamanistic Rage. This is a cooldown that you'll have every 2 minutes, and your 41 point count as an Enhancement Shaman, and it's basically an evocate. Each melee attack has a chance to return mana back to you. But how often does it happen? So this is a question a lot of us had, at least I did, going into TBC Classic. Is it a PPM? Is it just chance on hit? Like, what is it? I tested this with multiple imbue combinations, different weapon speeds. I tested it without Storm Strike, with Storm Strike, with a two-hand, two-hander. And what you can see right now, this is a box plot, and I've used box plots in almost all my presentations, and I did a analysis of variance, and what that means is a statistical test to determine if two box plots are different from one another. If any box plot shares a letter, that means they're not different from each other. So if we notice, all the ones with A's here are ones I did dual wielding with Storm Strike at different weapon speeds and different imbues. As you can see here, whether you're using Wind Fury or not, whether it's a slow weapon, a fast weapon, it doesn't matter. The average amount of procs or mana returns you get with Shamanistic Rage is not different from each other statistically. Going into this, I thought, well, maybe Wind Fury extra attacks can proc Shamanistic Rage. Maybe faster weapons can do it. No, actually, it's on a PPM of some kind. So it doesn't matter what imbue you're using, doesn't matter how fast your weapons are, how slow they are. As long as you're dual wielding and using Storm Strike, you're going to get about 11 procs per CD on average of mana return. And that's huge. That's enough to fill your entire mana bar. Then I said to myself, well, what if I take Storm Strike out? Is Storm Strike causing more procs to come? And yes, it is. So if you'll notice, dual wielding without Storm Strike, you'll see a B over that box plot. That means it's significantly lower than the other ones with Storm Strike. So you're only getting about 8 procs per CD if you're dual wielding with no Storm Strike. And then I said, okay, what if you're using a two-hander? Because people might want to use two-handers, maybe in PvP. Some people still think two-handers are good for PvE, which unfortunately they're not. But what happens then? Problem is they attack so infrequently that you get significantly less than if you're dual wielding. So you only get about 6 procs per CD if you're using a two-hander and using Storm Strike. And if you take out Storm Strike with the two-hander, you're only getting about 4 procs per cooldown. Long story short here, the take-home message is when you're using Shamanistic Rage, make sure you're using two weapons, you're dual wielding, doesn't matter what speed they are, doesn't matter what imbue they have, and make sure you're Storm Striking. That's the way you'll get the most out of the mana return from Shamanistic Rage. Okay, let's talk about Wind Fury. Wind Fury is not as simplistic as we thought. We already found out that it has a 36% proc feature that's kind of hidden, but there's another kind of interesting thing that happens with Wind Fury in TBC Classic, and that's to do with elemental weapons. So there are two main reasons why Wind Fury is the superior option, and it's because of the proc feature and because of Sync Stagger, which we'll be talking about in some later slides, but also elemental weapons acts on the effect of Wind Fury differently in TBC Classic than it did in Vanilla Classic. If you look at the tooltips here, as you can see by the spell wording, the effect is adding AP to 2 free swings in Classic. But in TBC, the effect is dealing additional damage. The Elemental Weapons talent multiplies just the bonus AP in Classic, but the entire additional damage in TBC. The next slides will break this down mathematically. But this is a buff to Wind Fury in general over Vanilla Classic. This is an image showing how Wind Fury breaks down in Classic versus TBC. In this panel, the character has 1,000 attack power, the weapon DPS is 100, the weapon swing speed is 2.6 seconds, and we're going to use rank 4 Wind Fury. It existed in both Classic and TBC Classic, and it provides a 333 attack power buff. And we have 3 out of 3 elemental weapons, so we're getting that 40% increase to the Wind Fury effect. In Classic, the normal hit does 446 damage, because it's the weapon DPS plus the character's attack power divided by 14, which is how we calculate DPS, times weapon speed. So that normal hit does 446. The first extra attack and the second extra attack are duplicated in this example, and they do 532 damage. It's the weapon DPS plus the character AP divided by 14, plus the Wind Fury attack power times the effect of elemental weapons divided by 14 times the weapon speed. That's the equation to determine the extra attack power bonus with elemental weapons in Classic. So total, our 2 extra attacks and our normal hit deliver 1,510 damage. In TBC Classic, the normal hit does the same amount, same equation, but the extra attacks do more damage, and here's why. The equation is weapon DPS plus character AP divided by 14, plus the Wind Fury attack power divided by 14, and here we see the difference. The 1 plus elemental weapons term is not there, so that's one difference. You add all those up, and then you multiply the weapon speed, and then you multiply the bonus. So the difference is the bonus gets multiplied at the end, and it affects the entire swing instead of just the first term of the equation. So that results in 711 damage with the same rank of Wind Fury weapon. So if we add all that damage together, it's 1,868 damage compared to 1,510 damage in Classic Vanilla. It's a 24% increase in damage with these stats. So in TBC, in this situation, the main hand Wind Fury hit does 178 more damage than vanilla, and a crit would do 357 more damage than vanilla. We can go a step further and add and do this again, but with 3000 attack power. As you can see here, all the math's the same. The only thing that changes here is the attack power on the character. And in Classic, the total damage is 2625 damage, and in TBC Classic, it's 3279 damage. That's a percent increase of 25%. So the increase in damage, the buff, if you will, increases with attack power. And in TBC, with this much attack power, our Wind Fury main hand hit will do 326.8 damage or 327 damage, and a crit would do 654 damage, more than it would in Classic. Another reason why Wind Fury is the best imbue in TBC is because it gets buffed plainly because of this change. Wind Fury as a weapon imbue is the best because it scales. Flame Tongue also scales. If you see part 1 of this Advanced Shaman guide for TBC, I talk about how Wind Fury scales with attack power because how mental quickness also increases spell power. So the more attack power you have, the more spell power Flame Tongue gets. However, Wind Fury scales better because it scales with physical DPS stats of the weapon. So for early endgame though, very early on, before you really have good weapons, I wanted to test what the imbues would look like compared to each other. And in the first box plot, the bigger box plot here, we have just solo, without, and not an array, just kind of by yourself, Wind Fury and Flame Tongue comparison. As you can see here, we talked about in part 1, if you don't know what I'm talking about, please rewatch that, because we talked about how Flame Tongue is a speed agnostic imbue, and Wind Fury is not. The reason why you want to have the slowest weapons possible if you're using Wind Fury is because slower weapons lead to bigger Wind Fury hits and stronger Wind Fury hits. In the first box plot here, we see Wind Fury with 2 slow weapons. It's the highest DPS recorded in all the tests I did. If you drop one of the weapons to a fast weapon, and here I use the offhand as a fast weapon with double Wind Fury, the DPS drops off significantly. If both weapons are fast, it drops off even more, and significantly so statistically. The 3 block spots on the right, the more orange color, are Wind Fury, Flame Tongue. Wind Fury in the main hand, Flame Tongue in the offhand. With 2 slow weapons, it's lower than Wind Fury, but not significantly so. It's still lower though. If you use slow fast, it's the same amount of DPS statistically. So again, you can use a fast weapon with Flame Tongue. It doesn't matter. It doesn't drop the DPS. But the minute you put a fast weapon on the main hand, as you see Wind Fury, Flame Tongue with fast, the weapon DPS drops off significantly. So in early endgame, let's say you have a good main hand for Wind Fury, and you found a really good dagger. Let's say you're exalted with one of the factions and you're able to buy one of the purple daggers. You might be able to get away with Wind Fury, Flame Tongue, because using Flame Tongue on a fast weapon doesn't significantly decrease the DPS at all. In fact, it's the same. And that's because of how Flame Tongue works, because it benefits in different ways. The faster the weapon, it benefits more from the magical damage. The slower the weapon, it benefits more by a Storm Strike. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, please watch part 1. I go into depth what that means. So in early endgame, before you get your BIS weapons, and you maybe have access to a really nice dagger in the offhand that's got a really high DPS, but it's really fast and you don't want to put it in your main hand, try Wind Fury, Flame Tongue. In the second imbue comparison, I just compared everything. Wind Fury, Rockbiter, Flame Tongue, Frostbrand, Wind Fury, Flame Tongue again. 2-handers. There's a lot of box plots here maybe you want to stare at for a while. The take-home message here is that 2-handers just aren't cutting it as far as DPS is concerned. The Wind Fury 2-hander is lower than almost all of the dual-wield setups. It's comparable to Flame Tongue, and Frostbrand, but it's way lower than Wind Fury, and this is the same item level weapons we're using here, and you can see across the board 2-handers just don't do very well. The 2 highest DPSs are Wind Fury, and Wind Fury, Flame Tongue, and that's the same thing we see in the first box plot. If you think that 2-handers are going to be a way to go for DPS and enhancement, I have some bad news for you. It's just not going to work out. Dual wielding was built to do the highest DPS, and with Wind Fury. That's just how the game was built, and that's how it was built around. Early end game, you could definitely get away with Wind Fury, Flame Tongue, but Wind Fury will outscale Wind Fury, Flame Tongue, especially with the better weapons you get in higher tiers and the blacksmithing weapons and the PvP weapons. But I just wanted to show you this graph to kind of compare all of the possible loadouts that Enhancement Shaman could potentially use in the game. And I'm going to corroborate this with an amazing tool that Nijanin has made. It's a sim that takes everything into account: your gear, your talents, the weapons, the speed of the weapons, the imbues of the weapons, everything. And in the first image, we have Wind Fury with 2 slow weapons, and it's producing 1821 DPS over the simulations that this spreadsheet is creating. If we use the same weapons and put Flame Tongue on there, you'll see it drops by over 100 DPS. So this is corroborated by his sim as well, and this is more accurate because it's in a 25-man setting with all the available buffs and consumables. On the next slide, we're going to do a similar comparison. So the same thing, Wind Fury with 2 slow weapons, and it's the same DPS, 1821 DPS, and looks what happens when we put a fast weapon in the offhand. It drops by exactly 200 DPS. So as you can see here, the importance of 2 slow weapons using Wind Fury is pretty robust. At higher levels of content with the same item level weapons with all the available buffs, BIS talents, and an ideal 25-man setup. So again, use this spreadsheet, the link will be in the description, to do your own similar tests with your own gear and your own buffs and your own talent setup. Now let's go over the 2 possible talent builds you can go as an Enhancement Shaman. The first is the LE subspec. The enhancement build is pretty much exactly the same. You're going to get all the important talents in the enhancement tree. The pros to the LE subspec is that it's a smoother rotation. I'll explain what that means in a few slides. It has higher DPS, and it's simmed to be about 10 DPS higher on average. That may not seem like a lot, but it is consistently higher DPS than the Resto subspec, which we'll cover next. The cons are, though, it's mana intensive. You don't have the reduction in your totem cost, and that's huge because you're going to be totem twisting as an Enhancement Shaman, or at least you should be, which we'll cover as well. And it's a small range in your totems, and if you're in a hunter group, it's going to be harder in your hunters, so you have to keep that in consideration as well. The talent tree at the left is at level 68. You're going to put 1 additional point into Elemental Focus or Clear Casting, so you can get some free shocks, because you're going to have to buff your mana efficiency somehow with this build. And the last point in Improved Fire Totems for easier Fire Totem Twisting, which is a way to maximize DPS as an Enhancement Shaman. And your rotation is to Storm Strike on cooldown, Shock, and then twist your Air Totem as a second priority, and your third priority would be to Fire Totem Twist, and your shocks are going to be a Frost Shock followed by 2 Earth Shocks or Frost Shocks. It's probably going to be Earth Shock unless there's a nature resistance involved. The reason why you're going to squeeze 2 Earth Shocks in is because you have Reverberation, and therefore you have a 5-second cooldown on your shocks instead of 6. And we'll get into rotations again in 2 slides. The next subspec, which is probably going to be more popular for Merc Shaman, is the Resto subspec. Pros are it's way more mana efficient, has a larger range in your totems, and it's better probably for solo and trash. Either you're farming in the world or you're cleaning up trash. The cons are it's less of a smooth rotation, and we'll get into why that is, and it's slightly lower DPS. This talent tree is level 67. You're going to put extra points in Improved Weapon Totems and or Concussion. Improved Weapon Totems, an extra point in there will benefit your melee in your group, and Concussion will increase the DPS of your shocks and the spell coefficient, as we found out in the early parts of this video. Your rotation is similar: Storm Strike on cooldown, followed by shocks and air twisting as the second priority, and then Fire Totem Twisting. Your shocks in this one are going to be a Flame Shock, followed by an Earth Shock, and then repeat back to Flame Shock. So it's Flame, Earth, Flame, Earth, Flame, Earth. Let's talk about Totem Twisting. It's a very important part of being a Shaman, Enhancement Shaman in TBC is Totem Twisting. With your air totems, it's pretty simplistic. We went over this in Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1. But Wind Fury Totem itself applies a buff, a 10-second buff to your melee in your group that provides Wind Fury. Since this totem provides a buff, and it counts down from 10 seconds, you can give them another air totem while this buff is still active on them. In most cases, it's going to be Grace of Air. So the way you're going to do this is you're going to pop down your Wind Fury totem, immediately replace it with Grace of Air. When you have a free point in your rotation, or the Wind Fury buff is about to expire, you're going to replace Wind Fury and then put down Grace of Air again, and you're going to rinse and repeat that throughout the entire course of the encounter. Now this is mana intensive, of course, so using a Shamanistic Rage on cooldown, using Dark or Demonic Runes, and potentially even mana potions, but you should use haste potions on your cooldowns to keep your mana up, is very, very important. Make sure Earth Shield's up, make sure Mana Spring Totem is also down. This is why the Resto subspec could be better in some situations, because your totem cost will be much lower. I highly recommend using a weak aura to track this. As you can see in the image here, I have this weak aura right above my player frame that shows the amount of time Wind Fury has on the other party members. I'll put a link to a weak aura that's pretty basic in the enhancement section of the description of the video, so you can download it and use it in PvE settings. You can also twist Fire Totems. Fire Nova has a 15-second cooldown and does a good amount of DPS, even single target. So the best way to maximize your DPS on the Fire Totem side of things is to cast Fire Nova, wait until the AoE bursts, and then immediately replace it with either Searing if you're using a single target, or a Magma Totem, and then repeat. Of course, if you have Fire Elemental up, you're going to use that because that produces the most most DPS, but if that is not up, you're going to Fire Totem Twist. Now, to make this Fire Totem Twisting easier, this is why we recommend putting a point and improved Fire Totems if you are an LE subspec, as it's pretty handy and fitting it into the rotation makes the rotation smoother. However, the Resto subspec is also nice because it reduces the mana cost of all your totems. But the take-home message here is that Totem Twisting is very important, primarily because of the air totems to buff your group, and secondarily to increase your own DPS via Fire Totem Twisting. And remember, if you're in a melee group, if you weren't twisting, you'd just be providing Wind Fury Totem, because your primary goal is to support as an Enhancement Shaman, so you're also increasing your own personal DPS by twisting your air totems in the GOA. Here's a rundown of the rotations. On the left, we have a case 1 where you are the Resto subspec, and you're twisting, and you have 9 shocks per minute because you don't have reverberation, so your shock cooldowns every 6 seconds. So at time equals 0, you're going to Storm Strike, and then at time 1.5, which is the global cooldowns 1.5 at your Storm Strike, you're going to shock. At 5.5 seconds in, you're going to drop Wind Fury, and then followed immediately by Grace of Air, and then followed immediately by shock. At 10 seconds, your Storm Strike, and then you'll see your shock cooldown start to drift because of the 6-second cooldown. So now your shock won't be up until 13.5 seconds. You'll twist at the same time interval, and then your shock will be up at 19.5 seconds, but it's going to clip your Storm Strike. So this is the problem with the Resto subspec, is that you're invariably going to, every other interval, that your shock is going to run into your Storm Strike, and this is going to lead to a loss in DPS. So this is why, one of the reasons why the Resto subspec has lower DPS is because you're going to have to push the rotation in one way or another. However, if you are a elemental subspec, you'll notice that the shocks are much more regular and they don't sync up with your Storm Strike. So you'll Storm Strike at time equals 0, followed by shock, followed immediately by your Totem Twist, and then shock again at 6.5 seconds. And this never goes out of sync. This is why the rotation is considered smoother. The Fire Totem Twisting is not in here, but it's, this is optional depending upon your mana usage and availability, but this is why essentially we say the rotation is smoother for the elemental subspec. Now it does come with drawbacks. It's more mana intensive. Your totem range is 10 yards smaller, so it's going to affect potentially hunters if you're on hunter group, but this is why the DPS is higher, is because it doesn't clip your Storm Strike and shock cooldowns. So the best thing is to feel this out on your own. Are you having issues with mana? Then you should probably go Resto subspec. If you're not having issues with mana and you're not in a hunter group, you should go with the elemental subspec and test and see which one gives you the most DPS. Okay, now it's time to talk about my favorite part of the enhancement section. Some new terms that we've come up with. Not me, people in the Discord that have been working on this extensively. Weapon Sync and Weapon Stagger. Okay, so what is Sync? Since Flurry has an internal cooldown of 0.5 seconds, if your main hand offhand swing within that interval, only 1 Flurry charge is consumed, not 2. We talked about this at the beginning of the video, but this leads to a 2% increase in DPS. Okay, then what is Stagger? The optimal DPS setup is to have 2 weapons of the same speed, but with the caveat that the main hand weapon always swings first, because the main hand Wind Fury procs hit much harder than offhand ones. If you want to min-max your DPS, this will also lead to a 2% increase in DPS on average. You can manually stagger your attacks so the main hand always leads. Assuming equal eye level, here is the following order of DPS metrics: a match speed stagger with main hand swinging first, mismatch speeds, and then finally match speed without staggering. So it's actually more beneficial to have 2 weapons of the same speed, but only if you stagger properly. If you don't, just go with mismatch speeds and try to keep your main hand swinging first. But having weapons of the same speed makes staggering much easier. Do my weapons have to have the same exact speed? Match speed weapons make this easier to set up and allow you to set it and forget it once you engage a mob. Mismatch speed weapons require a bit more involvement, but if you don't want to bother, they will naturally slide in and out of sync because one will swing faster than the other. For example, weapons that are mismatched by 0.1 second will be in sync almost 40% of the time. So again, if you don't want to have this really hands-on approach to your weapon speeds and your weapon DPS, you can go with mismatch speeds, and that will be the second highest DPS you can achieve. So what is syncing and staggering together? Syncing and staggering is when you have your weapons swinging within the Wind Fury ICD, so they're synced, and your main hand is slightly ahead of your offhand. That's considered staggered. This gives you both the Flurry double dip advantage, so that's a 2% increase, and ensures your main hand procs more Wind Fury. It's another 2% increase, and combining these effects actually leads up to a 5% DPS increase. It's just the way it maths out, because it's probably because of rounding and stuff like that. Okay, so how do I stagger then? It takes some practice, but there's an excellent video. I can't stress enough, excellent. It's 13 minutes long. If you're watching this is like an hour and 40 minutes long, right? Spend another 13 minutes watching this video. Thanks to SlimX, who made the video, and Lockall, who did also some testing, we know that it requires 2 steps. While you're using 2 weapons at the same speed, get just outside of melee range and start trying to auto attack. So right click the target, start attack macro, whatever it is, so your character has the ready stance and is going to attack. Then quickly step into melee range and your main hand should lead by anywhere from 0.4 to 0.2 seconds, which is synced. Anything below 0.5 is considered synced. However, there's also an amazing macro you can use to make this even easier if you're staggering improperly. And staggering improperly means that the offhand is leading, or your main hand and offhand are completely synced, means they're attacking at the same exact time. That's also not optimal because that means that it's a coin flip whether your main hand or offhand procs Wind Fury. You want your main hand to proc Wind Fury as much as possible. It's a very simplistic macro. First line is /tar player, second line is /target last target, and then /start attack. If you watch the video, you'll know exactly what I'm saying right now. I know it sounds like, what the hell is Melderon talking about? Watch the video. He explains everything I'm trying to say simply, easily. You want to make sure your weapons are both synced so that you're taking the advantage of that flurry ICD, and staggered so that you have more main hand Wind Fury procs than offhand Wind Fury procs. Now let's get into what weapon sync and flurry actually means. So if your weapons are not synced, meaning they're more than 0.5 seconds apart, your flurry stacks will reduce pretty quickly, within 1600 milliseconds. However, if they are synced, they are within 0.5 seconds of each other, your flurry stacks won't decay for 3200 milliseconds. In other words, double the time. So at 40 critical strike rating, doing this will increase your flurry uptime from 92% to 98%, and that's where the 2% damage increase comes from. So if staggering is just too much for you, at least sync your weapons so that they're attacking within 0.5 seconds or 500 milliseconds of each other so that you're able to do this. I beg you. It's going to increase your DPS. It's pretty easy to do as well. Now, weapon stagger and Wind Fury. Remember, so let's talk about why it's important to stagger your weapons so your main hand leads. Normally, there's a 50-50 chance that a main hand and offhand swings first, whichever one hits, right? Now, as Lockall and SlimX have illustrated in their video and their testing, if you stagger your sync in such a way that the main hand always leads by less than 0.5 seconds, then the main hand will usually be the hand to swing first, and you preserve that flurry ICD at the same time. This will give your main hand a 60% chance to be the one that proc Wind Fury instead of 50%, meaning that your offhand will proc Wind Fury 40% of the time. Since Wind Fury extra attacks are 30% of your total damage, and main hand swings hit twice as hard as offhand swings, this results in a total DPS increase of 2%. This is why it's so important to sync and stagger your weapons. So putting this all together, your first primary goal is to make sure you have 2 slow weapons. Second primary goal is to make sure they are matched speed. If you want to be sweaty, you can go for an offhand that is 0.1 seconds faster than your main hand, and it requires you using this macro every single swing. If you don't want to do that, if you don't want to do any of this, like any of the sync, any of the stagger, just make sure your offhand is 0.1 seconds slower than your main hand. And if you just don't care at all, just make sure you have the highest DPS weapon in your main hand. So this is a list of sweatiness, basically, right? So the most optimal setup would be to have 2 slow weapons of match speed that is synced and staggered. And if you want to get extra sweaty, you can go for an offhand that's 0.1 seconds faster and then use the macro every single swing. And then if you want to be casual, you have options, right? So I can't stress enough that this is not as hard as it sounds. It really isn't. All it takes is a few seconds of understanding how this macro works and how to walk in on a mob. Don't just run in randomly. Stand outside of its melee range for a second. That's all it takes while you're ready to attack the target, and then move in. That'll guarantee that your weapons are at least in sync, and then you can just pop this macro one time at the right time interval, and that will guarantee that your weapons are staggered, so you're producing the most DPS possible. Like I said in this green text at the bottom, if you want to excel at enhancement DPS, I cannot stress enough to watch this video. The link will be in the description, in the enhancement section of the description specifically. It's a 13-minute video. Again, just watch it, understand it, and I guarantee you by the end of that video, you're going to say to yourself, wow, this isn't as hard as I thought it was. Okay, let's talk about the enhancement sim. In the enhancement PvE guide I did with Eben, we talked about how important simming is. EPs only get you part of the way. Having a sim that tells you exactly what upgrades to look for and what DPS you can expect is the best way to plan upgrades and improve your play. Now, official web-based sim is a work in progress. However, Nijanen and Beagle have created that DPS TPS sheet for TBC, and it's an amazing tool. A link will be in the enhancement section of the description. Click on it, save yourself a copy, and play around with it. Also, join the Shaman Discord because this is invariably going to be updated at some point, and we update everyone when it gets updated, and you'll be able to click on that new link and make yourself a copy and enjoy the sim as it gets updated with new gear or improvements. Let's go over enhancement pre-raid BIS. Now, Garkor and Gitch have created a progressive BIS list, it's still being worked on at the current moment that this guide is being made. However, they do have a static link for pre-raid and tier 4 already done. Tier 5 and beyond, the gear outside of weapons is pretty much done, and they're still working on weapon simulation. Pause the video if you want to look at these weapons and gear and see which is best for you. The TLDR here is, fortunately or unfortunately, blacksmithing really isn't BIS anymore, at least not currently. It may get better later on in the game, but as of right now, as you can see, if you're an orc, you want to go for those gladiator weapons, the Decapitator, Fool's Bane, even Harvester of Souls is better than Black Planar Edge and Dragon Maw. If you're a non-orc, blacksmithing may be a little bit better, but you still don't need it. You can get the gladiator weapons, the Decapitator, Fool's Bane. If you don't want to PvP at all, then blacksmithing may be a lot better for you. But even if you do want to PvP a lot, you're probably going to want to make the Thunder, Deep Thunder, just have a two-hander, right? As an enhancement shaman. So blacksmithing isn't worthless, it's just not BIS. At least right now it's not in tier 4 and likely not in tier 5. But again, it may get better later on. Just keep looking at the sheets, join the Shaman Discord, talk to these guys, and they will tell you exactly what's BIS for the upcoming tiers. Here's tier 4 BIS. Tier 5 BIS, not including weapons, again that'll be updated later. Tier 6 in ZA, same thing, weapons will be updated later. And finally, Sunwell Plateau. So briefly talk about mana management and threat capping. In order to manage your mana as an enhancement shaman, which is very important because you got to keep all these things up, totem twisting, fire totem twisting, shocks, all these things, right? You might want to look at some high intellect side grades in the BIS lists. Example would be the Ebon Nether Scale set in phase 1 to increase your overall intellect pool. Second thing is to use dark runes. You should be using them. Demonic runes are much easier to come by the way, but if you want to do dark runes, you can either buy them or run some Skolo and get some. I highly suggest using them on cooldown. They have a different cooldown than potions, so they won't ruin your potion cooldowns. Third thing you can do is downrank your Wind Fury totem. It is a overall DPS loss, but it still provides a second attack just with less bonus attack power for your melee friends. Stop fire totem twisting will be the fourth step. Again, DPS loss, but doable. 5 is the respec to the Resto subspec if you're currently using the Ellie subspec. 6 is to use mana potions instead of your haste potions for your potion cooldown. I've done this before in the beta. It's not pretty, but it's something you can do. 7th thing you do is drop shocks totally from your rotation, and now we're getting pretty extensive in our DPS loss, but steps you can take to manage your mana. And 8, you can always just reroll a Warlock. Now to mitigate threat capping. As I said before, because of Wind Fury and because of the burst DPS we do, it's not uncommon to pull threat off a tank. Trust me, I do it all of the time. It sucks. And there's really nothing you can do about it. But if you are threat capping, if you notice you're getting too close to the tank, what you can do is remove shocks until threat is under control. And the second step, which is pretty harsh, is to stop attacking altogether or equip really low level weapons like skinning knives just to keep your Unleashed Rage buffs up for your fellow melee. So Aldor or Scryer's Enhancement Shaman. The Aldor or Shelter enchants are slightly better as far as EPs are concerned. It's not a huge difference, but Aldor is the best. However, the Saffron enchant is BIS at 26 attack power and 14 critical strike rating. So if you have the option to get that, you should get that. But as I said in the other sections, if profession items or early gear access is more important to you, go with the faction that facilitates that. Pretty easy. Okay, let's go over enhancement professions. I've already alluded to some of this, but let's talk about it. Leatherworking is easily above the alternatives in terms of your contribution to the raid via drums and relevant phase 1 gear. Blacksmithing gives you the best pre-BIS weapon and an amazing PvP weapon. In phase 2, the blacksmithing one-hander likely is a side grade with Kael's Mace. Blacksmithing, again, is just not BIS anymore. For a second option, if you don't want to go blacksmithing, engineering is not bad. Gives you an active DPS items with value beyond passive stats, side grade BIS head from phase 2 onwards, and all kinds of utility in the forms of bombs and all kinds of other engineering doodads. And if you're a speedrun guild, you might want to go with that. And of course, you get a helicopter if you go in engineering, so shout out to Copter Gang in the Discord. Jewel crafting gives a minor stat boost, medium quality trinkets, the group-wide buff necks, which we talked about in the elemental section, and the BIS Sunwell Plateau epic neck in tier 6. So not a bad choice, jewel crafting. Also makes some gold with it too. Enchanting gives you a minor passive stat boost, while tailoring does nothing for us. Alchemy gives us a trinket we don't want, and access to cheap potions, also the ability to make some cash. Here's a handy flowchart to help you make your decisions. If you are the dedicated drummer in your group, which you probably will be, you're going to want to go with leatherworking. If you're not, you could do something with engineering and whatever, or engineering and jewel crafting, engineering and blacksmithing. There's pretty much a lot of options you can go with, but use this flowchart chart to kind of make your decisions for you. I think leatherworking is probably going to be the best option for most people. Secondary profession, it really matters how you're playing the game and what you want to do and what you have access to. Engineering will provide the best utility in the speed run. Jewel crafting will provide some BIS items, especially later on in the game. Blacksmithing is great for if you're an avid PvPer, and enchanting has its benefits as well. So use this flowchart, try to kind of plan your professions out. Personally, I'm probably going to go leatherworking and blacksmithing because I plan to PvP a lot, and I like having access to other weapons if I can't get something from a raid drop. So consider that as well, like you'll have more weapon options as a blacksmith. Alright, we're on the final slide of the guide itself. We have 2 more goodbye slides, but these are additional resources, and these links will be in the description. There's a TBC raid group composition synergy spreadsheet by Lockall. Really awesome, lets you kind of plan your groups out and how they'll interact with each other with their buffs. Well, it has a similar tool in the raid composition tool. It actually just came out today when I recorded this video. I haven't got a chance to check it out yet, but I'm sure it's beneficial. I probably would imagine Lockall's is better, to be honest. Osgar's TBC Classic Downranking tool and guide. Again, I talked about this as a friend of mine who designed this same thing for Classic, and he did it for TBC again. It lets you see how downranking affects your spells if you're a healer. 70 upgrades for gear planning. Be careful with their EPs. They're usually not very accurate, but it's really good for planning gear sets and sharing gear sets. The Warrior compilation from Meiji. I'll have a link to that in the description as well, and that'll help with Enhancement Shamans mostly for melee mechanics. Classic WoW Armaments Discord. That's Gideon AI's Discord. I really would suggest heading over there. He does a lot of work and really cool stuff exploring the less explored parts of the game. WoWTBC.gg is a good comparison website with gear options. However, don't use their APs or their suggestions for BIS. I would use current Theorycraft from the Shaman Discord. Okay, we've done it. Thank you so much for watching the Advanced Shaman Guide Part 2. I cannot stress enough how much work was done by volunteers in the Shaman Discord. This guide would not be possible without them. And if it would be possible, it'd be not as good. Nowhere near as good. So thank you so much, everyone. The work you do, it's just amazing. You know, co-running a Discord with Eeg and seeing the amount of work that gets done is just really proud of what we've built. So thank you so much. There are other TBC Shaman resources to check out. I've created, with collaboration with other people, a PvE guide for each of the Shaman specs. 90% of the information is valid. It's just the kind of things like professions and some BIS options have changed, but the Theorycraft is sound. So if you're interested in a certain spec, I would definitely watch those guides. Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1 for TBC Classic is the predecessor of this current video. It's a really good start to understand Shaman and the idiosyncrasies of Shaman. It's a 3-hour video, so I go over a lot, and I would check those out. I'll have a link to my overall Shaman Guide playlist in addition to these videos in the links in the description. Classic Shaman Discord, as I said, if this guide hasn't given you a reason to join this community, I don't know what will. The amount of work and dedication by these people that are in this Discord is just amazing. There'll be a link to the Shaman Discord in the description below. Once you click that link, you'll go to our README channel. The first 3 reactions on the first post dictate which part of the Discord that will be open to you. So you click the reaction to what you want to see, and that will be open to you. If you don't want to see classic vanilla content, don't click on the reaction. If you want to see just TBC, click on that one. And we even have a Wrath of the Lich King button. There's nothing there yet, but we have it built, so when we build out the Wrath of the Lich King version, that will be showed to you if you want to see it. And again, you can click more than one, of course. Classic WoW.Live is a site we used for primarily vanilla classic. However, Egregious is putting his progressive BIS list for TBC on that site, so check it out, and that's where we'll have that information for you as well. Finally, this slide is a special thanks slide to all the people who made this guide possible. Thank you all so much. Nijanin, Sophist, Huang, Hatali, Lockall, Beagle, The Logarithm, Tolian, Sakarnan, Shaq, Jacko, Garkor, Gitch, Eben, Hitbutton, Meiji, Fenris, Dragonhoof, Gideon AI, The Bloodborne, Eco, Senna, Fohawk, Slimex, Diamp, Zoya, Tambard, T-Bone, Lig, Aided, Caperfin, Thick Granny, and Juiceman. Thank you all so much. I know I probably missed people. I'm really sorry about that. I tried to get as many people in here as I could. Also, thanks Egregious, but I didn't put him in here because he's the co-founder of the Discord, so we work together, right? So I didn't want to put him in here, but thank you everyone else. You just did so much work and collaboration to make these guides possible. And I have to say, I don't think there's a class in WoW that has as much representation as we do as Shamans. And of course, you know, being a content creator, we get more exposure, but still, it doesn't discount how much work gets done in the Discord. So thank you all. Well, everyone, thanks for watching this guide. Keep on keybinding and grinding. And peace, my Shaman brothers and sisters. May the ancestors be with you.